You get a fever. You reach for medicine, maybe call a doctor, maybe just lie down and wait it out. It's automatic, routine. Something is wrong with your body, so you handle it. But strip away every hospital, every pill, every modern comfort, and go back tens of thousands of years to a small band of humans moving across open land with no walls and no safety net. Someone in that group gets sick, really sick. What happens next might be the single most important thing your ancestors ever did, and it has almost nothing to do with medicine. Start with a hard truth. Ancient life had no antibiotics, no surgery, no understanding of germs. A broken leg, a bad infection, a difficult birth. Any of these could easily be a death sentence. So the obvious assumption is that sick or injured members of the group were left behind. Slower prey. A liability the tribe couldn't afford to drag along. It sounds brutally logical. Survival of the fittest, right? Except the evidence tells a completely different story. In 1957, archaeologists in Iraq uncovered a skeleton in Shanidar cave that changed how anthropologists understood prehistoric life. The remains, known as Shanidar 1, belonged to a Neanderthal man who lived roughly 45,000 years ago. His skeleton showed a devastating list of injuries: a withered, partially amputated arm, blindness in one eye, signs of a severe leg injury. And here's the detail that stunned researchers. He lived with these injuries for years, possibly decades, after they occurred. He couldn't have hunted. He likely couldn't have gathered food effectively either. Someone kept him alive anyway. Why would a group under constant survival pressure spend its limited resources on a member who could no longer contribute? Paleoanthropologist Penny Spickens has spent years studying exactly this question, and her research points to something profound about how compassion functions in human evolution. She argues that care for the sick and injured wasn't a lucky accident or a soft-hearted exception to survival logic. It was a survival strategy in itself. Groups that cared for their vulnerable members built something incredibly valuable: deep, reliable trust. And trust, it turns out, might have mattered more to long-term survival than any single hunter's spear arm. Think about what trust actually does for a group of humans living entirely on cooperation. If you know that a broken leg won't get you abandoned in the grass, you take more risks. You climb the steeper cliff for better foraging. You approach the larger animal. You explore further from camp because you know that if something goes wrong, your group has your back. A tribe where injury meant abandonment would be a tribe full of overly cautious, self-protective individuals, each one quietly calculating the odds before doing anything remotely risky. A tribe where injury meant care could take bigger risks together, and bigger risks, taken safely, often lead to bigger rewards. This idea connects to something biologist Sarah Blaffer Hardy has written extensively about: the concept of cooperative breeding and extended caregiving networks in early human groups. Human infants are famously helpless for an unusually long time compared to other primates, and raising them required more support than any single parent could provide alone. That same infrastructure of shared responsibility, the aunts, the older children, the unrelated group members who pitched in, didn't just apply to babies. It extended naturally to anyone who was temporarily or permanently unable to fend for themselves. Care wasn't a special program activated only for the sick. It was simply how the group functioned, all the time, for everyone. There's archaeological evidence of this pattern showing up again and again. Skeletons with healed fractures that would have required weeks of immobility. Individuals with congenital conditions who survived into adulthood despite physical limitations that should have made independent survival nearly impossible. Elderly individuals with worn, toothless jaws who clearly lived years past the point where they could chew tough food on their own, meaning someone was preparing softer food for them, deliberately, repeatedly, for a long time. Here's where the story gets even more interesting. Anthropologist Lorna Tilley has proposed something called the bioarchaeology of care, a framework for studying exactly what level of support a disabled or injured skeleton would have required to survive as long as it did. In several documented cases, the level of care required goes far beyond simple food sharing. Some individuals would have needed help with basic mobility, wound cleaning, protection from the elements, even assistance with things as fundamental as changing position to avoid further injury while healing. This wasn't charity performed in a spare moment. This was sustained, deliberate labor, redirected away from immediate survival tasks toward keeping one vulnerable person alive. So what does this mean for the tribe deciding who eats first or who gets carried when the group moves camp? It suggests the calculation was never as coldly efficient as modern assumptions make it sound. Groups that survived long enough to become your ancestors weren't necessarily the ones that ruthlessly cut their losses. Many of them were the ones that invested heavily in keeping every member alive, because a member saved today might save the entire group tomorrow, through knowledge, through loyalty, through the simple fact that trust compounds. A tribe is not just a collection of individual survival odds added together. It's a network, and networks get stronger, not weaker, when every node knows it won't be abandoned. This reframes something about the modern instinct to see vulnerability as pure liability. In a world that often measures people by output, productivity, and contribution, it's easy to assume that ancient life, being harsher and more immediate in its dangers, must have been even more ruthless about who deserved resources. The opposite appears to be true. The harsher the environment, the more essential cooperation and care became, not less. A single hunter, however skilled, could not outcompete a cohesive group that trusted each other completely. There's something worth sitting with here. The instinct to care for someone who can't immediately repay you isn't a modern invention, a product of religion or philosophy or civilization softening us over time. It's older than language, older than agriculture, older than almost every institution you can name. It shows up in the bones themselves, in a Neanderthal man who couldn't hunt for years and lived anyway, in elderly jaws worn smooth from decades of prepared food, in fractures healed slowly under someone else's watchful care. You probably won't think about Shanidar one the next time you're sick, or the next time someone you know needs help they can't repay right away. But the instinct you feel, to show up, to bring soup, to sit with someone through something hard, isn't sentiment layered on top of survival instinct. It might be the survival instinct itself, running exactly the way it did tens of thousands of years ago, in a body far less equipped than yours, kept alive by people who understood something that still holds true. A tribe that takes care of its weakest members isn't wasting its strength. It's building the only kind of strength that actually lasts.